Okay, boys and girls, we're a little, we skipped around a little bit in your notes, so you want to look for lesson 4 in your guided notes. Lesson 4. So when you find that, we'll get started. Okay, so hopefully you found lesson 4. It's right behind the notes on factoring cubic functions, which we will come back to that later. So today I just want to kind of give you a strategy for factoring polynomials. And this will also help you with your quiz tomorrow. So the first question you want to ask when you get ready to factor is there a greatest common factor? Factoring can be a little bit confusing because you don't know where to start. So the purpose of this flowchart is just to give you some tips on how to start. So the first question you want to ask, is there a GCF? That's always the first question you start with. Is there a GCF? If there is a GCF, we want to factor it out. If it's not a GCF, we want to continue on and ask ourselves how many terms. So we want to factor out the GCF, but then we want to see if there's anything else that we can do. So after you factored out the GCF, you want to ask yourself, how many terms does the polynomial have? If it has 2 terms, remember terms are separated by addition and subtraction. If it has 2 terms, then what we want to use is the difference of 2 squares. We want to check to see if it has the difference of 2 squares. And that, remember, you have 2 perfect squares subtracted. If it is the difference of 2 squares, we're just going to use this formula, a plus b, a minus b. Now, what we haven't talked about yet are difference of cubes, which we will talk about on Monday. So if it has 2 terms, you also want to see if it's a difference of cubes. That would be the next place that we would check. And if it's the difference of cubes, then we want to use one of these 2 formulas. If it has 3 terms, then we want to try to use the AC method. That's where we multiply A times C and then factor by grouping. So if it has 3 terms and one of them is if the highest exponent is x squared, then we want to use the AC method. That's where we multiply A times C and then factor by grouping. If it has 4 terms, we want to factor by grouping. And there's not much else we can do if it has 4 terms. We want to factor by grouping, and then we want to group the first 2 terms, group the last 2 terms, and then factor out a GCF, which we've already done. So let's get started, but remember, guys, we always want to start by asking, is there a GCF? That's always our first strategy when we're factoring, is to always ask, is there a GCF? All right, let's do some practice work. All righty, so we look at this first one. What's our first question we're going to ask? Is there a GCF? And the answer to that question is no. There's no GCF here. So then we ask, well, how many terms do I have? I have 2 terms. So I have 2 terms. One's a separate subtraction sign, so it could possibly be the difference of 2 squares. Is it? Well, 9x squared is 3x times 3x, and 4 is 2 times 2. So this is the difference of 2 squares, so we can write this as 3x plus 2, 3x minus 2. Okay, let's look at the next one. What's the first question we're going to ask? We're going to ask, is there a GCF? And there is a GCF. The GCF between 50 and 200 is 50. So we're going to factor out the 50. And that's going to give us, excuse me, 4x squared minus 1. So remember, if there's a GCF, we still may be able to factor this again. That's called factoring completely. So we notice, wait a minute, this is still the difference of 2 squares. So because it's the difference of 2 squares, because this is 2x times 2x and 1 times 1, let's factor the difference of 2 squares. So that'll be 2x plus 1, 2x minus 1. What do I do with this 50? Well, it just comes down. Okay? So let's look at problem 3. What's the first question we ask ourselves, guys? Is there a GCF? There's a GCF in 3 of these, but 2 is not a factor of 3, so there's no GCF there's not a number that goes into all 4 of these. So how many terms do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So what should we do? We're going to factor by grouping. So the first two terms, the first GCF between these two are 2x squared. And then I'm left with x minus 2. This has a negative, so remember, if it's a negative, I'm going to factor out a negative. And the GCF between 3 and 6 is 3. When I factor out that negative, that's going to change each signs. I think let's change that to plus 6. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So change that to plus 6. We factor out a 3. We get 3x minus 2. So then we have 2x squared minus 3. And then x minus 2. Sorry about that typo there. That should be a plus 6 there. And you already have the notes, so I can't go back and change it, but I will change it for the next year. Okay, let's do another one. Well, how about this? Why don't you pause the video and you try the next 3, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Well, the next 2, don't do this one. Okay, so welcome back. So the first question, is there a GCF? So is there a GCF between those two? And yes, it's 3. So that gives us x squared plus 27. Now that sort of looks like it's a difference of 2 squares, except for we don't have a subtraction sign. So since we don't have a subtraction sign and 27 is not a perfect square, there's nothing else we can do with that. We're done. For problem 5, what's the first question we ask? Is there a GCF? There is not a GCF. So we have 3 terms, so we're going to use the AC method. So that's where I multiply 3 times negative 20 and I get negative 60. I ask myself, what can I multiply to get negative 60 and add to get 11? So I got 60 and 1, I got 30 and 2. I've got 15 and 4, and I've got 12 and 5. I need 11 in the middle. I think 15 and 4 will work if I make 15 negative and 4 positive. So I can rewrite this, 3x squared. Remember, the outside stays the same, and I change that middle number, so that'll be negative 15x plus 4x. Then I'm going to factor out a GCF. The GCF here is 3x, and that leaves me with x minus 5. I can factor out a 4. That leaves me x minus 5. So then factoring by grouping, I get 3x plus 4 times x minus 5. Okay? In problem number 6, it is the difference of 2 cubes, which we will talk about that at another time, so I'm not going to do that right now, but this is the difference of 2 cubes. Okay? Let's look at number 7. I think you should be okay with pausing the video and trying the next 3. Okay? Welcome back. So this first one, what's the first question we ask? Is there a GCF? So I'm going to pull out the GCF, which is 3, so that gives me x cubed plus 8. Now technically I can factor this again because this is the sum of 2 cubes. But since we haven't learned that yet, I'm going to leave it alone for now. Alrighty, if I get to the next one, what's the first question I ask myself? Is there a GCF? And is there a GCF? Yes, there is. We can factor out a 2. And we have x squared plus 10x plus 16 plus 24. Because, you know, that math thing kind of gets to me sometimes. Plus 24. Okay, what can I multiply to get 24 and add to get 10? 6 and 4. So this is x plus 6, x plus 4. And what do I do with this 2? It comes down. Alrighty. Number 9. What's the first question we ask? You've got it. Is there a GCF? There is a GCF of 2. So this becomes 5x cubed minus 10x squared minus x plus 2. Okay? So then my next question is, can I factor it again? Well, it has 4 terms. Let's see if I can factor by grouping. So if I group the first 2 together, my GCF is 5x squared. So I'm left with x minus 2. Remember, if negative is your first term, you're going to factor out a negative. So I'm going to factor out a negative 1, which is going to make that x minus 2. Oh, look, we can factor again. So x minus 2, 5x squared minus 1. I forgot something. What did I forget? I forget this 2. This 2 just comes down. It's like we put it on the shelf and then we pull it off the shelf when we need it. Okay, so that's it for the lesson on factoring, a strategy for factoring. And what I'd like for you to do is this activity in your notes. And what you're going to do, you're going to factor each one of those, and you're going to find the factor form and paste it here and move it here. But then you're going to tell me what methods you use. So for this one, we factored out a GCF, and then it became a trinomial. So what methods did you use to factor it? That's what you're going to type here. And that's all we have for today. Make sure you do your exit tickets for today and your homework, which is your quiz review.